Today I'm gonna keep it extremely simple. I am just gonna walk over here and start with my 74 911 RSR, tell you a little bit about it. Then we're gonna go to the next car, the next car, and the next car. So hopefully we can cover, we'll see if we can get through all the cars in here. And then we're gonna go through that door over there and go into the much larger garage where there's a lot more cars. So I'm not sure exactly how far we're gonna get depending on how much I have to say about each car, but let's go ahead and get started. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. I'm gonna kick it off right over here. This is my 1974 911 RSR. Now I've been racing this car for over 10 years and it hasn't been on the track for the last year, and I'll be able to show you here. Well, let me just go ahead and show you why. Because this car is missing the engine. You can see right here, no engine out. So what happened was I was heading up the straightaway at Road America and engine let go. Now, granted, it did have 100 hours, race hours on the engine, which normally, they'll go about 80 hours before you need to rebuild them, but I pushed my luck a little bit too far and sure enough, it went. Now I have aftermarket gauges in here simply because these are a little bit more reliable than the original Porsche gauges, I think anyway, and and they also cover a little bit better range as far as temperature range, and they're easier to glance at, especially on a track. So that's the reason why it doesn't have the original gauges in. Of course, you have all your switches down here. Obviously it has windshield wipers, headlights, all that type of stuff. You have your main ignition, fuel pumps, everything over here. And then of course you have your cutoff, and see here I got my cool box right over here, and of course the sway bar right here, because you have to pull that out in order to get the transmission and engine out. So, and I always put all the parts in the car because otherwise I will lose them. 12-gallon race tank, but you never run full 12 gallons in there. You usually run about 6 depending on the track. Of course, you have your oil there, overflow. This is my, brand new to me, this is my 1985 and a half 944. Now, I say half, and those of you that know Porsches will understand how kind of critical, or even know 944s, I should say, will know how critical that half is, because mid-year, they did an interior, they did an interior change on all the 944s, because they did actually have the interior basically pulled from the 924, which is a cool interior, don't get me wrong, especially in the 924 Carrera GT. So if you guys out there don't know about the 924 Carrera GT, look that sucker up, because that is a car I want. I want it bad. Very, very rare car. They only built right around 400 of them. But we'll get back to this 944. So this, like I said, it's a 1985 and a half. I was very, very lucky to find this car. I found it up in Kansas City. It was on Facebook Marketplace, which just so happened to pop up, and I jump on there I jump on there all the time. I'm kidding myself. So it popped up there, and I immediately jumped on it and went up and looked at it, and I could tell that it was just an absolutely fantastic condition. It's got about a little over 30,000 miles on it, 37,000 miles on it, but it's a 2-owner car. And the gentleman that I bought it from was telling me stories about how he remembers riding in this with his grandpa, and he would sit right in that back seat right there, and he just thoroughly enjoyed it. But he was a little scared to keep this car maintained, and it took up some garage space, and his wife was getting a new car, or they wanted to get a new car, and they didn't want this thing taking up the garage space because they really didn't drive it that often. Just on a nice Sunday, they would pull it out. Of course, I put on the correct size tires here. And the neat thing about this 944 is it came as an option with the 15x7s and 15x8s. So a lot of the 944s of this era just had the 7-inch all the way around, but this one actually had the optional, a little wider by 1 inch on the rear, which I think looks fantastic, especially with the kind of the 15-inch fat tires that stick out. All of those that have driven 944s, it's not about the power. It's not even close about any of the power, because they really don't have a lot of power. This puts out about 150. I think they were rated at 147, 150, right around there. So not fast car, especially by today's standard, but fun car to drive. It's all about the 50-50 weight distribution in these cars. And I became a huge fan of 940s. I had never driven one until I went vintage racing school so I could start racing. And the school that I went to had 944s, and I quickly learned how fantastically balanced and how much fun these cars are. And so that's what really got me on the kick of 944s. And then of course, well, what am I talking about? Duh, I mean, I literally started collecting 944s. So over here, You know, this one's naturally aspirated. Over here, it's like its big brother, much more powerful car by a long shot. These put out stock. This is my 1986 944. I bought this about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. Found this, man, in Ohio, actually. And it was a 2-owner car as well. I love this car. Like, everything that you don't like about the regular 944, which is not much, except the power, the lack of power. This car right here solved it, which I just love this car. So now this one has been, you know, it has a few little tidbits here and there. So thanks to Lindsay, it has a Lindsay chip, has a couple other components on here that bump it from 217 or 220 horsepower to right around 320, 330 is my guess. And it will flat get up and haul the mail. Now, one of the things too that I love about this car are the seats. In any 944, but Porsches, the seats are just the best, especially even traveling a certain amount of distance, just because they actually have, you know, they're long right here. And so I kind of have long legs. I'm about 6'3". And so I love the seats that you can crank the front up and it supports your thighs. And so that allows me, I mean, I could drive this car cross country, no problem. And I have taken this car on some long trips, but I do have the old, my son thinks this is an old man's deal right here, but the dash, it actually has no cracks in it. I just put this up there simply from a reflective standpoint, because I do drive this car a tremendous amount. These cars right now, I think are extremely still undervalued. The best money, I bought this car for right around the $20,000 range. Now that one over there, I picked up for the naturally aspirated car. That car was right around $11,000 with a little over 30,000 miles. There's no better car you can buy for the money besides, you know, I know a C5 Z06 or something like that, but even those cars are getting hard to find clean. But if you've never driven one of these, go drive one. They are great cars. Now, speaking of great cars, have you guys heard anything about the new FL5 Type R from Honda, of course? You talk about great cars. Everything that you hear about, read about, I don't know about you guys, but I've seen every video about the FL5 Type R, and you gotta believe it. I mean, so I did have an FK8 before this car, and I never trade cars in. I mean, I never sell cars in general, nor obviously, or trade them in. And I had that FK8, and that car was absolutely fantastic. I loved that car. Now, it's a little controversial as far as the way they look. When they first came out, the FK8, I was like, oh man, they look kind of boy racer per se. But it grew on me. And then I drove one, and I was like, oh my gosh, this car, I don't care what the heck the darn thing looks like on the outside. It drives so great. Then this car came out, and I think it fixed all those issues, as everybody else out there in the automotive world have said as well. They kind of, I don't say they toned it down, but they made it look a lot better, which I believe they certainly did. And then I drove this one. I drove my FK8 300 miles to Fayetteville, Arkansas to trade it in. It had 25,000 miles to trade it in for this one, which is brand new, a 2024. And to be able to drive those things 300 miles, the FK8, and then pick this one up and drive it back, this car is by far a better car than the FK8. And I thought the FK8 was amazing. This car, the FL5, is that much more. You know, everybody's saying, oh, it's 5% better here, it's 10% better here. No, it's night and day. The interior, there's not one thing on this car I don't love. The interior, they just knocked it out of the park. I mean, it is just fantastic. Now, the seats in the FK8 held you in extremely well, but these, I didn't get tired at all coming back, where on the FK8, I know 300 miles, a couple hours, but I got out, had to get a drink, things like that, and my legs were a little bit stiff. But driving this thing back, it was no issue. I don't know if they're a little bit longer right here in the thigh, like I said, like I talked about on the 944s. I don't know if that's the case, but in the shifter is definitely a bit different, better shifter. And the FK8, the old one, was great, but the ergonomics on this car are, boy. In the FK8, I kept on thinking, well, I wish they would have done this, or I would have changed this or that. Let's talk about price a little bit too. So obviously I traded this one in. I did get this one at just about MSRP, and I don't buy any car. I have never bought a car at MSRP or over MSRP, but this is one of those cars where I have no regrets. A lot of times, you buy a new car, you come back, you have it for a while, and you're like, oh man, you know, if I sold this car's not going anywhere. This is a car that I would have, honestly, I would have paid over $50,000 for this car. It is that good. You guys, if you ever get a chance to drive one of these or buy one of these, I certainly understand why they were bringing well over sticker, because they're totally worth it. I mean, at a price of, you know, over $40,000, especially, I thought, well, you know what, I'm gonna wait till these things come down in price, and or, you know, I'll wait and pick up a used one. But as soon as I drove one, I couldn't wait. I couldn't wait. I just couldn't wait. And I you know, I never buy new cars because I hate the depreciation. But, you know, as far as depreciation goes, I guess it only comes into play if you're planning on selling it or trading it. Now over here, talking about a car that I absolutely love. Well, I love all the cars, but this one especially. Now you guys might recognize this car because this used to be Tyler Hoover's car, Hoovies Garage. This was his car. He owned it for quite some time. He picked this car up. Now, I guess tell you, well, you guys probably already know what this car is. This is a 1995 C36 AMG, the very first AMG that Mercedes ever built. And it has a 3.6, hence the C36, a 3.6 liter inline 6-cylinder engine. Now that is a big engine, you guys. I mean, especially considering today where the FL5 over here has a 2-liter, you know, very small 2-liter turbocharged engine. This, especially for the day with the 3.6 liter, was quite the car. Now this obviously competed against the M3s, which those had inline 6s as well, of this era anyway. I bought this car from Daniel's son. You guys may have remembered, if you guys follow, which I highly recommend following the Hoovies Garage. Tyler did a Christmas special where he gave away 5 Mercedes. And he was very nice enough to invite me to be on the show. I came on the show and I had no idea what was going on that evening. And, you know, so he just said, hey, Brian, show up. We're going to be shooting a show. But I didn't know he was giving away cars, giving away 5. I mean, who does that besides him? So anyway, this thing rolled out. This is the first car that rolled out, if I remember right. And I just hit the floor. I was like, are you kidding me? I get a chance to drive out of here in a Mercedes, let alone a C36. And anyway, you guys will have to watch that episode. It's Tyler Hoovies Garage Christmas special. Well, lo and behold, spoiler, I did not win this car. I did pretty pitiful. I think I was the only one that left that night without a car. But I came home that night at midnight, and it's terrible to admit this, but I stayed up till like 2 or 3 in the morning looking for one of these cars, because I remember when this car first came out, I had every road and track car and driver. I remember on Motor Week, they tested a red one, because that was like the epitome of Mercedes, the very first AMG, and that inline 6 just sounded so good, and just the way it looked, I had to find one. So I started looking and looking and looking, and all the ones I found had an issue. They had rust, primarily. And I was looking at some, I found one in Chicago, of course, right up under here, it started to rust. I had asked for pictures later on during that week on various cars. They all had rust, they had some type of issue. Whereas this one, it had no rust. Even though this has 240,000 miles on it, it is completely clean underneath. Now, it wasn't without faults. And going in and knowing that Tyler had it, and you know, Daniel's son, he ended up having, who works for the Car Wizard, he won it with an amazing putt. So I told him after the show, I said, listen, Daniel, if you ever decide to sell this thing, please, 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 please give me a call. Sure enough, a couple weeks later, he called me and said, yeah, Brian, I think I'm going to part ways with it. You know, what do you think? What would you give me for it? And then he came up with the idea. He said, you know what, I tell you what, I would probably go like $4 grand. And then he came up with the idea of us doing another putt off. Since he destroyed me in the Price is Right game there that night, he decided to do another putt off. So I was going to putt. If I made the putt, and whoever made the first putt, I was gonna buy it either for $4 grand or $5 grand. So you'll have to watch his channel, Daniel's son, and watch where I was lucky enough to make a very lucky putt. And I think he felt sorry for me. Anyway, long story short, I bought this car from him for $4 grand, but it needed a lot of work. The interior was pretty rough shape. As you guys know, on Mercedes, you know, usually the wood, now this used to be wood, and it was all split up, cracking. Even up here, this piece right here was splitting. So what I wanted to do is I was going to refinish all of the wood in this car. And as I started to pull out the entire interior, because it actually had some actuators that were going bad in the back of this dash, Johnny, AKA the Car Ninja up in Wichita, he actually ended up pulling the whole dash out. I went up and grabbed all the parts. And as I started looking at them, I thought, man, it's going to be too difficult or beyond my skill level in order to refinish the wood. Plus, I just thought the outside of the car, especially given these different wheels, this DTM look, I thought, boy, it'd be really neat if I could do a carbon fiber look. So I found some carbon fiber wrap that was really thick, and it has the larger pattern in it, I guess you say, or the larger weave that I thought was kind of indicative of this era, because that's when they really started kind of using a lot of carbon fiber in the 90s. But it wasn't a really fine or the shiny carbon fiber. It was kind of this style. Anyway, I went ahead and sanded everything down and wrapped it all in this carbon fiber look. And it's very thick, and so the texture, it has a good texture to it. So I think it's gonna hold up extremely well. I took all the seats out of the entire car, back seat, front seat, because it was, I don't think this car had ever been cleaned ever since it was brand new. At least the seats that I know have never been out of this car. So I scrubbed and shampooed, not once, not twice, but I think 3 times, vacuum shampooed. Ended up pulling out, actually the money's right over there, $1.73, which I probably owe that to either Tyler or Daniel's son, so I'll have to give that back to him. But I put a lot of labor in this sucker. But now the paint is pretty rough. Well, pretty rough. It's very rough. It's got, oh my gosh, you could run your fingernails all over and it probably would actually even up helping it. So, but it's pretty bad. It looks like a cat got out, well, multiple cats, probably a pride of lions almost was on this thing, it looked like. So the paint is really, really bad. But the thing is, I kind of like it like that. Just because it's got that patina. This car's got so much history with the previous owners out in California, with Tyler, with Daniel's son. And now I know if I painted it, you talk about upside down in a car, because it would cost thousands of dollars to paint it. I don't know. Tell me what you guys think. Should I paint this car or should I keep it just like it is now? If I painted it, man, this thing would be like brand new. 240,000 miles, doesn't matter. It would look brand new because the interior and everything. Johnny, it did have a few leaks. The head gasket, not the head gasket, but the valve cover was leaking. I was gonna do it myself, but oh man, Johnny's so good. I mean, check out his channel, Car Ninja. He knows these cars much better than I do. So I took it up to him and he did a fantastic job. He and his crew up there. So they did an alignment on the car, did a few other things. It needed a steering stabilizer. I put that on. Now, this car is dialed in and I absolutely love it. One other thing I did. So when Tyler had it, I think before him, there was a straight pipe on it, so it did not have a muffler, which it was cool. It sounded okay, but being a 4-speed transmission on the highway at about 80 miles an hour is about 3,300 RPM, and it had a pretty good drone. Now, I mean, I don't mind loud cars, but in this car, it's kind of one of those cars you don't want to just have it just booming inside. So I did find an OEM exhaust system, or at least the muffler. I put that on the other day, and oh, it's a much better car to drive. No drone, and it's all about, you know, the performance, and you can just, well, you can hear yourself thinking it now. Sorry, I know I spent a lot of time on this car, but I really do love this car. Honestly, this is gonna sound crazy, but I like this car just as much as I like this new FL5. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous, loving a $4,000 car as much as a $46,000 car, but I'm just crazy like that, I guess. Moving on, let's go over to my this is actually a 1987 911 Turbo that used to be maroon. I bought it long time ago. I had it sitting over the corner in my shop, my old shop, for a long time. Finally, John James Racing, I talked them into building me this 934. So it is backdated to look like a 1976 934 Turbo, which the 934s were never street legal. The 934s came out, obviously started racing, and then later on Porsche came out with the 1976, or actually 1975 I think is when the 911 Turbo, I think it wasn't until 76 is when it hit the US shores, but it was all the rage. Well, obviously Porsche went racing, and so especially with the 934 here, these things were animals on the track. This car is one of my favorite cars I've ever owned. It's got the center knockoff wheels, you can see right here. These are 15-inch. As you guys may have watched a couple of my other episodes, I am not a fan at all when they take cars and they build 911s up, especially early model 911s, and throw on 17s, 16s, 17s, and 18s, and sometimes even 19s, which really drives me insane. I like the look that it looks like it just came out of the Porsche factory, and that's what I'm all about. So the interior, it even has the roll cage, just like the original 934s, which they actually were bolted in just like this. So you can see, no radio, of course. I don't put radios in any cars. Now it's over here because I was doing quite a bit of maintenance on it. So finally I got a chance to get up on the lift. It was been up here for about a week, going through obviously oil changes and then going through and doing a nut and bolt check, just like a race car, because it does have pretty tight taut suspension. So just like a race car, put it up on the lift every so often, and do a nut and bolt check and then mark all the nuts to make sure that nothing is actually moving. But now one thing I did do on this car, so this is a built engine. It put out with a 0.8 bar boost spring in it. It had the stock wastegate in it. It was probably putting out probably 450 horsepower right around there. I just put on a tile 1 bar wastegate, so a much better wastegate than the stock Porsche unit, and I have yet to drive it yet with the wick turned up a little bit. So we're gonna find out how much faster it is. I'm gonna guess it's gonna be right around 485, maybe even 500 horsepower. It was crazy fast before. I mean, if any of you have ever driven a 911 Turbo with well over 400 horsepower, they're awesome. They're awesome. I don't know if there's any better car. And this one can shoot pretty good flames out the back. You can see, so you've got your pipe coming off your wastegate, and here's your main exhaust. Huge intercooler, unbelievable car to drive. Love, love, love it. We got to keep going here. Otherwise, we're not going to get to the other room. This is my 1987 Cosworth Sierra RS. I purchased this car many, many years ago. I had a friend that actually had a Mercury XR4 Ti, which I loved. Of course, those had the 2.3 liter turbo engines, which were fantastic engines. Those were used in Thunderbirds, the SVO Mustang. Wonderful engine. You can get huge horsepower out of those. I don't know if you can get as much horsepower out of those as you can in these. These are a 2-liter turbocharged. Now, stock, these cars weren't all that spectacular, 214 horsepower. Now the RS 500s, which look just like this, and had quite a few other little tweaks, not necessarily suspension, but engines, injectors. Those cars could easily pump out 5, and then race trim, I think some of them were even around 700 horsepower, which is crazy to think about. Those men and women that race these cars with that kind of horsepower, pure skill. I mean, people think they can drive a race car, with that kind of horsepower effectively on a track. It can be difficult, especially when you have a bunch of cars around you. This car, I truly, truly understand what everybody said overseas when these cars came out. They were just awesome, and they still are. And this one actually has a nice dash. A lot of them are cracked. The seats are still really nice in this car. All the trim, the headliner. I am doing quite a few things to this car. I just got done putting in a fuel pressure regulator, because some of you that watch the channel might remember this was up at Johnny, the Car Ninja as well, because he actually needed to put a new steering rack in it. Something really exciting is going to be going on with this car. Side exhaust on this car from the same company, Hayward and Scott, that built them for the touring cars. I ordered one of those. They're building it for me right now. So side exhaust. These wheels over here, I know I'm spending a lot of time on this car, guys, and I'm sorry, but Cosworth, you got to spend time on the Cosworth. Check this out. So these wheels right here are going on that puppy right over there. Now, I had these things paint matched to the color because that's not really a bright white, it's kind of an off-white. And when I got these in, these were really bright white, and I held them up to it, and that just wasn't gonna do it. So I had these sandblasted and painted to match. So I'm getting ready to put tires on these, and these wheels are 18 by 8s. And so I think they are gonna look absolutely amazing on this car. Now, the thing I didn't want to do is I didn't want to modify, go crazy on this car, but what we're going to do, hopefully you guys will subscribe, we're going to bump this thing up to about 320, 330 horsepower, which will be easy to do. Mount those wheels. We're going to have side exhaust, maybe a few other things, and it's going to be the ultimate Cosworth. I'm telling you, it's going to be amazing. I cannot wait. So, all right, we gotta keep rolling. We gotta keep trucking here. This over here is my 1974 914. I will say I just bought this. No, I bought this car 2 years ago, and it's finally here. I bought this car solely based on word of mouth and pictures. So I was getting ready. I was gonna drive it back from Arizona, so I was out there for Barrett-Jackson. But then a snowstorm hit between here and Barrett-Jackson, and luckily my good friend, Euro-Asian Bob, said, Brian, you can't drive that thing back, it doesn't have a heater. Sure enough, there's no heater in this car. So he was kind enough to let me drive back a C4 Corvette, which, thank you again, Bob, that probably saved my life, honestly, because we hit the worst 3 blizzards pretty much in a row. And now, although this might have gotten through the snow better than a Corvette with probably 285 tires on the rear, I would have froze to death, no doubt in my mind. So thank you again. So we're gonna do some cool stuff with this. It's got a 2 liter in it right now, but I think we're gonna flare the flares out. We're gonna put some GT flares on this, and we'll see what we're gonna do engine-wise. We may have to yank that 4-cylinder out of there and put a something with six cylinders. Obviously a Porsche engine, but I don't know if we're gonna go with a 3-liter, a 3.2, maybe a 3.6 would be awesome. That would be, I mean, I don't have that much money in this car and it would, but we may have to do that. We may have to do that. Okay, moving on. This over here is my I would say 65, but it's a Kirkham Cobra. It was built in the early 2000s. This actually has, it's an aluminum body. So I've never washed this car. As you guys could probably see here, it is, I mean, look at that. It's ridiculous. Now I have washed the windshield just so I could see out, but I've never washed this car. I think the dirtier it gets and just the grimier, the cooler it is. I mean, look at the front of this thing. It's got bugs caked all over it. And I don't care. I don't care. I mean, I will never wash this car. I don't care if I go through a pile of mud and crap. I'm not gonna, it might stink like crazy, but I'm not gonna wash this car. I don't know why exactly. I get sentimental, and my son, this was his favorite car when he was 1 or 2 years old, because he would sit right here in the seat right there and grab onto the steering wheel and have his sticky fingers from having them in his mouth and putting them all over the dash. Okay, so we gotta keep moving on. This video is becoming way too long, and I apologize if you're still with me. Thank you so much. So this over here is my 1986 Renault Turbo 2. This is probably the poster child for turbo lag. You talk about turbo lag. So you've got a 1.4 liter, actually less than a 1.4 liter, feeding into a turbo that's obviously the engine's inside here. You can see right here. If you're not familiar with these cars, these are something else. And no, they're never gonna make another car like this, because literally, who's gonna make another car when the engine is inside, not even blocked? I mean, you guys, there is no glass between the engine and the driver and the passenger. There's nothing. The engine is right under here. You get an exhaust leak or you get anything like that, you're pretty much screwed. It's amazing that they even made this car. I can't think of another car that had the engine basically in the compartment with the driver and the passenger. Awesome, awesome car. You talk about fun to drive. They were built to do rally racing, and that's what this thing is meant to do. It is just awesome. Awesome. The dash, it's tiny. The steering wheel kind of sits at a funky angle, which I love. Now these seats have been redone. I wish they hadn't redone these seats at some point before I bought it, because normally these seats, all the interiors had like a tan cloth interior. These were redone in leather, even the top, the headliner, and the back, of course, which I showed you before. But these seats are so ridiculously comfortable, just absolutely amazing, amazing car. And I mean, I could seriously take this thing on a long drive. Now, I might not go very fast. I might, you know, once you get over 105, 110 miles an hour, it gets to be a little dicey. It doesn't want to go a lot faster. It would want to go faster than that, but it just doesn't feel right, if you know what I mean. Between, you know, 40 miles an hour and 80 miles an hour, it's like its sweet spot. Yeah, I could never sell this car. Number one, I probably couldn't afford to buy another one, because these things, I bought this car when they were like at the very rock bottom, like well sub $30,000. And now they've just gone through the roof, but I understand why. They had two different kits. One was stock. This car would put out 160 horsepower. Then they had the 180 horsepower kit, which is what this car has. Makes a big, big difference. Makes it a lot faster and just a lot more enjoyable. Just an amazing, amazing car, and one that I hope that I never have to part with. So here we are in the much larger garage, a lot more cars in here. Unfortunately, I've taken up way too much of you guys' time. So if you want to like and subscribe, that would be great, because then you can join me next time and we'll get a chance to go through even more cars. So we'll see you again, hopefully next time. Take care.